let's be honest, there are several great applications on the market, both free and paid, for drawing. But what a lot of people don't know is that Blender 2.83 actually has an entire 2D animation system called Grease Pencil built right in. And it is great for making custom Twitch emotes. And you can even use it in conjunction with all of the cool 3D tools Blender has to offer. Now, before we get started here, I just want to iterate and reiterate that I cannot teach you how to be a better artist. There's just no way for me to magically bestow some inherent artistic ability upon you like some sort of god. The only way to become a better artist is to practice some more, and keep practicing. Everyone has at least 1,000 bad drawings in them. But what I can do is show you how to use the tools. By the end of this video, you should have a pretty good understanding of how to use Grease Pencil and Blender 2.83 to make a custom Twitch emote. That being said, let's get started. My name is Chris Folea. I'm your stream scholar. Welcome to Stream School. Alright, when you first open Blender, it should look pretty similar to this with the Blender splash screen. And normally when you start a 3D file, you would just click off and get to work on whatever it is you're working on. But if we go back to the splash screen, you'll notice Blender actually has a bunch of different default workspaces we can choose from. And specifically, the 2D Animation Workspace is really good for making Twitch emotes, because if we click that, you notice it basically turns Blender into a drawing program. And if you want to incorporate 3D elements as well, this is still a 3D scene. It just sets us up with a camera with a white background, which functions as our canvas, Grease Pencil stroke object, and it puts us into draw mode so we can actually draw. And if you don't have the splash screen up, you can hit Control-N on your keyboard, or you can go to File, New, and select 2D Animation from there. And when it first comes up, you'll notice that this fills up the screen entirely. To see your canvas or the camera outline, you can just scroll back on your mouse wheel, and you'll notice that this doesn't match up with what a Twitch emote needs to be. A Twitch emote, first of all, needs to be a transparent PNG. If we hit F12 to render this out, you'll notice this is solid white, which is not what we want. So to fix that, we can go to the camera tab right here, go down to Film, and select Transparent. So now if we hit F12 to render, we get a fully transparent image, which is perfect. Then you'll notice that this is a rectangular image by default, and a Twitch emote needs to be 28 pixels square, 56 pixels square, and 112 pixels square. So to change that, we can go to the printer icon. And for the resolution X, I'm going to select it and type 100. And for the resolution Y, I'm going to select that and type 100. And the reason for that, it's just like a small quality of life thing. But when you're making a Twitch emote, you want to test it out at multiple resolutions throughout the process to make sure it's looking decent at such a small size and it's looking decent at its biggest size. And changing both of these values repetitively gets tedious, even if you know the hotkey to change both at once. So personally, I just like to change the percent slider because 28% of 100 is 28 pixels and 112% of 100 is 112 pixels. So that just makes it a little bit easier. That being said, our document is now pretty much set up for making a Twitch emote. And you'll notice that as a drawing program, we have the Grease Pencil stroke object, we're in draw mode, and we have the pencil tool selected. So if we click over here and drag, we get a line. And before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and turn on Screencast Keys before I forget, so you can see what I'm pressing down here in the corner. But I'm going to zoom in on this line, and you'll notice that it's very thin, and it's kind of like a medium gray. And we can change both properties of that stroke. So if we come up here to the top, you notice we have a radius property. And if we make that bigger, we get a bigger stroke. If we make it smaller, we get a smaller stroke. And over here, we have a strength property, which changes the opacity or transparency of the stroke. Right now, it's 60% or 0.6 opaque. If we change it to 1, it's fully opaque, which makes it black. If we change it to less, it's less so. But coming up here and changing these sliders over and over again is pretty tedious. So the hotkeys for this, for strength, is Shift F. You can move your mouse, make it strong, move your mouse, make it weak. And then For the radius, you can hit F on your keyboard, make it big, make it small, do whatever you want here. And I'm going to go ahead and clear my canvas just to demonstrate some of these other things. So I hit Tab to go into edit mode, A to select everything, and then delete to delete the stuff. But in addition to the radius and strength, we have a few other stroke options that we can change here. So under and this is related to smoothness mostly. So if I draw a stroke here, you'll notice it's pretty lumpy. Let me make it just a little bit smaller so I can demonstrate better. You'll notice that I don't have a perfectly smooth hand. It's a little bit lumpy because I'm not a brain surgeon. But if we go to the stroke menu, we have this post-processing option. So if we turn smoothness up on that and we draw, I'm making myself look bad on purpose here, just so it's very obvious what's happening. If I release my mouse, you'll notice that it changes some. It tries its best to smooth it out. And it's not 100% perfect, and I personally wouldn't recommend using this because it can give you unpredictable results. But the other option for making a smooth stroke is to go down to the stabilize stroke. If you've ever used ZBrush before, this is similar to like a lazy mouse. So you can click and drag, and you'll notice there's like a little red rope attached to the line. So between your mouse and that red line, over that length, it averages the movement of your mouse. So if you have a jittery hand, it's able to smooth it out pretty easily. And you can change that radius if you want even smoother stroke. So if I come up here and change the stabilized stroke to like a radius of 100, now that red line is much longer and it's going to average much more to make a much smoother stroke. Cool. The other option here is randomization. So you can randomize the pressure and draw, and that'll make it look sort of like an ink pen by having different random widths of the stroke. And then we also have the strength randomization, which just makes it look kind of dumb. I don't know why you would ever want to use that. I guess you can get creative. UV, I'm not entirely sure what that one does. I'm assuming it's related to stroke textures. And then jitters the position of the texture. In addition to that, we also have the advanced panel, which allows you to make like calligraphy kind of brushes with the angle. So if we change the angle, which we don't really need to, or the factor squishes it. So 0 is like a perfectly circular brush, and then 1 is a perfectly flat brush. So if we change this somewhere in between, and we make our brush a little bit bigger, and we draw, you'll notice that it looks kind of like a calligraphy brush, which is pretty cool. And for all of these settings, we actually have some presets you can choose from that they've set up for you. So you can click the little button next to where it says pencil up here. You notice we have airbrush, ink pen, and a bunch of other ones. And I'm not going to go through each of these individually. I'll let you play and explore with those individually on your own time. But I'm just going to use the ink pen for the purpose of the tutorial. And before we go any further, it's important to understand how these strokes are drawn. So if I draw a line, let's say I draw a circle, we just have a stroke, we don't have a fill. And if I zoom in on this and hit tab to go into edit mode, we have a stroke that we can select, and we can move this around by hitting G, rotate it by hitting R, scale it by hitting S, the same movement and rotation and scale keys throughout all of Blender. But what you'll also notice is that this is comprised of individual points. So if I change to point select mode, we get a bunch of dots. And if we hit G to move any of these individually, and then click to apply, we can change the outline of the stroke. So all any grease pencil object is a line created by points. And each point has a width or a radius associated with it, and a strength associated with it. So I can even just change the radius of individual points here, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But I'm going over this right now because another option for a grease pencil material is to make a solid fill. So if we come up to our default materials panel, we select solid fill, and we draw a shape. Now we're only drawing the fill and no stroke. And the default workflow that they have set up in a 2D animation document, if we come down to this little green squiggly line, which is the stroke panel, is a layer for lines and a layer for fills. And that makes a whole lot of sense for an animation workflow where you're drawing individual frames of an animation, you just want to fill stuff in quickly. But for an emote where you're doing really detailed work with lots of different pieces and layers, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if we have a fill here and we turn off our lines layer, you'll notice that this is an entirely separate object from our line that we just filled in. And managing two objects, a stroke and a fill for each object, becomes very tedious. So the recommended workflow that I would recommend, that was redundant, is to delete both of these layers and create new layers as you need them. I'm gonna make a face emote tonight, so I'm gonna name this layer face. And if we go to our materials panel, select square stroke, hit the minus button, select dot stroke, hit the minus button. Now we have an option for a solid stroke, a solid fill. Well, let's create a third material by hitting the plus button and then hitting new. And we're gonna name this fill and stroke. So you notice stroke is checked by default on this grease pencil material, but fill is not. So if I check fill, make that sort of like a base gray or something, have this material selected, and then draw, which I have the paint bucket selected. Whoops, if I click the pen tool and draw, now you'll notice I get a stroke and a fill, which is exactly what we want, because if we're creating a character and we want to add like arms or something, this looks so weird. We want the fill and the stroke. We don't want to manage that separately for each piece of the object. And you might be thinking right now, but Chris, that's gray, and I don't want to make a new material for every single different color that I want in my emote. And there's good news for you. For that, we can use Vertex Colors. So if we come up top here, I'm gonna go ahead and delete all this again. If we come up top here and go into where this material button is and click the points, now if we draw, we're using the vertex color for the stroke. And if we change that, we get a different vertex color for the stroke. Usually though, you don't want to change the stroke color. You want to change the fill color and leave the stroke at a black. So for that, I'm going to come over here to this panel. If you don't have it up, you can hit N on your keyboard to show or hide it. I'm going to go to Tool, and where it says Vertex Color, which is this button right here, or either of these buttons, I'm going to change the mode from stroke to fill. So now the vertex color is only affecting the fill. Cool? Cool. I think it's pretty cool anyway. So I'm going to hit Tab, A, delete points to get rid of all of that, Tab to go back to draw mode, and let's make a blue face, which we haven't covered the shapes yet, but we're going to use the circle tool in just a second. So I'm going to select this blue swatch right here, then I'm going to make my own swatch. And if you make your own color on this wheel, make sure, this is a very, very important, make sure you hit the new swatch button so you can select it easily again. The reason for that is there's a bug. If I draw a blue shape right here using this swatch, then I try to get back to that color by using the eyedropper, and I draw again, you'll notice that there's a slight mismatch. We have a darker shade of it instead of the actual color. But if we select the swatch, it's a perfect match. So I think that's a bug. Just make sure anytime you make a color that you're going to reuse, turn it into a swatch. That is very important. Sorry for hitting my microphone there. This looks like a weird nose guy. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this stuff again. Grab the circle tool now that I have a blue that I like. And I'm going to click and drag. And you'll notice that this stays a little bit washed out, and we have a yellow dot, a red dot, and a yellow dot. That means that this circle does not exist yet. This circle has not been placed onto our canvas yet, so I can still hit escape and just never have to worry about it again. But if I draw it and want to keep it, first of all, I can click the individual yellow dots while it's still in this mode. I can hit G to grab it and move it around while it's still in this mode. Or I can hit F to change the radius while it's still in this mode, or I can hit Shift F to change the strength while it's still in this mode. But then, to actually apply this, to make a circle and actually apply it, you have to hit Enter on your keyboard. And I just realized my screencast keys are way the hell over here. I'm gonna make them a little bit more visible for you all. Okay, because it was covering the tool. So you'll notice now we have this circle that we made, and that is fine and dandy. That's great. But let's say I want to make parts of the stroke thicker and parts of it thinner to sort of embellish it a little bit. I can hit Tab to go into edit mode, make sure I have point select selected, which you can also change between these 3 selection modes with 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard. So 1 for point select. I'm going to select the bottom point, and if I hit Alt S, that adjusts the thickness of that point. However, Blender actually has a proportional falloff editing mode. And what that means, if I turn it on by clicking this button right here, is if I move something like this point right here, by hitting G and then move it, you'll see this faint circle appeared, and everything within that radius gets affected less and less and less and less to the border of the circle. And we can scroll our middle mouse wheel to change the radius of that circle, or the area of effect. And that is proportional editing. So that doesn't only apply to movement, it also applies to rotation, it also applies to scale. But it also applies to changing the thickness of a point. So if I select the radius tool and I move this point, that's great. But it's very difficult to now scroll the middle mouse wheel to change that while I have this clicked down. So the hotkey is Alt S. Then you can move your mouse in and out, and you can scroll your mouse wheel to change the area of effect very easily since you're not holding anything clicked down. And let's say I want the bottom of this to be a little bit thicker and the top to be a little bit thinner for our face. Then I'm going to go to Stroke Select, hit G to move the whole guy, hit S to scale it, hit G again to move it, S to scale it, until it's just sort of centered on our canvas a little bit. And at any time we want, we can hit F12 to bring up the render window to see what our emote is looking like on a transparent background. But anyway, I'm going to hit Tab to go back out of edit mode. You can also do it with the drop down right here again. And let's add some eyes. And before we do that, let's make a new layer so we can easily isolate those. So if I hit plus on the layers panel and say eyes, now I can draw another circle, but you'll notice that that's blue. So I'm going to hit escape, come down here to my palette and select a nice white. Then I'm going to draw out the eye. And for some reason that white didn't get selected. So I'm going to do this again, draw out the eye, shape it how I want. I can hit F to change the stroke width, something like that, and G to move it around. So you want our guy to be looking to the right a little bit. So we'll have this spaced out from the left some. Once that's placed however I want, hit Enter to apply. And now this is on the eyes layer, so I can turn that off individually. Now, if we wanted to change the shape of this using proportional fall off, you'll notice something weird happens. So let's go to Edit Mode by hitting Tab. Let's go to Point Select, select a point, hit G, and with Proportional Edit, you'll notice it's also editing the face, and that becomes problematic. But there's a really easy fix for that. If you go to the Proportional Editing menu and you check the Connected Only box, now, if I move that, it will only proportionally edit anything that's part of the same object, like this eye. Now, I personally want my eyes to be circular, so I'm going to leave it alone. I just wanted to show you that functionality. So I'm going to go to Edge Select mode, select this, hit Shift D to duplicate, right click so it doesn't move anywhere, S to scale, to make our pupil. Then I'll hit, these are all basic Blender hotkeys, but if you're new to Blender, I can understand it can be pretty confusing. So G to grab and move it. Then let's make our pupils like a nice bright blue of some sort. So I'm gonna go back to my tool panel. And this is white right now. And like I said, you don't want to use the fill bucket because it'll create an entirely separate fill object. So for this, we're gonna use the tint tool. And by default, this changes the tint of the stroke, which we do not want. And there's no option to change that up here. Oh, there is. Yeah, so you go to mode and you change that to fill. My bad. I was thinking of a different area. So then I'm going to select a nice blue, I guess, and just move my mouse around the stroke, around the vertices, to fill in the pupil. You can do the same thing anywhere by just like moving your mouse around stuff for the fill. And it takes a little bit for it to happen, but if you drag and draw in the center, nothing will happen. You have to do it on the stroke if you want to change the fill. Just a little bit unintuitive, but it's also pretty easy to get the hang of. So now that we have one eye in place, we can go to edit mode. We can select you, making sure we're on edge select. Hit Shift D for duplicate, X for the X axis. Move it along the X axis right here. And then maybe you want to select these two and move them over here a little bit more. Cool. Now we have some eyes on our little face. So next, this is coming along, but the next thing we want is some more details here. So I want to add like a tongue sticking out and some little eyebrow areas or eyelids, I guess. So for that, I'm going to go out of edit mode by hitting tab, grab the pencil tool, and we do want to keep fill and stroke. We're going to come down and select our face color. And actually, rather than using the pencil, let's use the arc tool. So if I click that, click and drag, that'll make a nice arc. And in the same way as the circle, this does not exist on the canvas yet. We can still manipulate this and then hit enter to actually shove it on the canvas. And you get 3 points to change on the arc to put this however you want. So then I'm going to hit enter to apply it. And we still have this little area right here, but we'll get rid of that in just a second. I wanna do some stuff with this first. I'm gonna go into edit mode, point select the two end points of this. Under proportional fall off, I'm gonna change it to sharp fall off. You have a bunch of different fall off options. So constant, for instance, if we move these, only everything within the circle moves exactly the same amount. We have smooth fall off, which falls off smooth for the radius of the circle, or we have sharp fall off, which falls off sharply, which is what we want. So if I hit Alt S to change the thickness with sharp fall off, now we get a really nice looking sort of crescent shape. Then to cover this up, we're going to grab our pencil tool, change this to just solid fill, and draw right around there. And now we have a solid fill object covering it up. Wonderful. So now we can just duplicate this over to the other eye. We can go to edit mode by hitting tab, go to stroke select you, hit Shift D for duplicate, X for X axis, and move it over. And I understand that this is generally a very different workflow than something like Illustrator or Inkscape, but it also has its advantages. I think it's a very powerful workflow. So now for the tongue, I'm going to show you a couple other tools. So if we go back to fill and stroke, make a nice red tongue, and we draw that shape. Let's say a tongue that looks like that. You'll notice it's pretty lumpy because I hand drew it. And if we go to edit mode and select that stroke with stroke select again, I'm going to go to point select just so you can see what's happening here. You don't have to. You can go to stroke, simplify, and sample, and that will even out the points on the stroke. It still looks lumpy though. So then you can go to point and smooth points. Notice it smoothed it a little bit. And the natural response would be to just do it again and again, but that's really tedious. So you can come down to the last performed action box right here, click it, change the repeat value up to smooth it out more and more and more. And you can also mess with the smooth factor, but the repeat box should be fine. And that'll give us a really nice smooth tongue, which, yikes. Then I'm going to change this to stroke, and I'm just going to draw this, hit tab, select a point, or select the stroke actually, go to stroke, simplify, sample, point, smooth points, and then repeat it some to make it nice and smooth. We can move this around with G. We can scale it. And you just get a nice clean result. So then I'm going to go to point select the two end points with shift select, and hit Alt S to scale those down and mess with the radius with the mouse wheel as we've been doing this entire time. Just like that. Now we have a tongue sticking out of our face. And if we render that out, it's looking kind of cool. We might want to add a mouth next, so we can do the exact same thing we just did, except make this stroke and fill. Just keep in mind for what material you want for each one, and select it before you create the stroke. You can change it later, but it's easier to do it this way. So now we've got our mouth. We might want to smooth that out too, which the arc tool might even work for a lot of this, but drawing it manually and smoothing it works as well. You can do simplify sample, point, smooth points, and repeat it a bunch. Now we have a mouth, looking cool. And then finally, we might want to add some shading to this. And you can do this in a couple ways. You could do just a solid fill for your shade, or you could do a solid stroke and change the width of it. My personal preferred method for our current example would be a solid stroke. So if I select our blue, change our mode to stroke under the color, that's important, and then let's make this a little bit brighter and a little bit less blue by changing the saturation. So now if I draw this up here, or we can just use the arc tool even, draw this here and arc it so it matches nicely, which we're going to make the middle thicker, so remember that. We get a nice highlight. Hit enter to apply, tab to go into edit mode, select point select. We can select the middle point, set this to a smooth fall off, and make that thicker. Again, this is the same stuff we've been doing the entire time, just over and over and over again. Select both of the endpoints, do a sharp fall off, hit Alt S again, and we can change the thickness of that. And now we have a nice highlight at the top of the head. We can also select the stroke and we can scale it, we can rotate it, we can do whatever we want with this. It's a really powerful workflow. Then to duplicate it, we can just hit Shift D, move it right down here, click to apply, rotate it, put it into place. Now we have a shadow that's bright, so it's not a shadow, it's like a reverse highlight. But to change this stroke color, we can grab our tint brush, change the mode back to stroke, and now we can make a nice darker blue and just paint that right along the stroke until it's nice and solid. And that looks a little bit harsh, so I'm actually going to select the face color and just make that a tiny bit more blue and dark, and that'll look, I think, a bit nicer. Then we can do the exact same thing for the tongue. We can select the red, we can make that less saturated, we can draw a nice stroke here, hit tab, select the stroke, go to simplify sample, point smooth points, and smooth it. G, R, just move it around, same stuff we've been doing. Again, nothing new here. Then go to point select, select the two endpoints, Alt S to scale those down. Cool. Then we can do the exact same thing for this side of the tongue. Select the stroke, go to stroke, simplify sample, point smooth points, and smooth it on out. Select the end points, hit Alt S, and then we probably want this to be darker so I can tint it differently. So take the dark red sample. That's actually a little bit drastic, I think. Here we go, and just scrub this along until it's nice and painted. We can also increase the size of this and it'll do it faster. Yeah, there we go. We have a nice little smiley face emote, or at least a good start to one. Which I realize this isn't the best emote in the world, but it's a pretty good start. One other tool that you're going to want to know is the eraser, which allows you to just erase stroke. What's important to understand here is that it will fade out the stroke, but it will still, those points will still exist until the opacity is 0, then it deletes them. And you can do the same thing by just deleting individual points, honestly. But just know that that option exists as well, but it does affect your fill. But you can also do it here. And you can up the strength as well, so it just goes much faster. That's another option for a tool. You also got all these lines, these squares, these circles, or whatever. And make sure, I didn't stay super organized throughout this tutorial. Also make sure you're staying organized with your layers, because right now our shading and our eyes and our tongue are all on the same layer, and that's not well organized. You can move stuff to different layers later, and I'll show you how to do that really quick before we finish up here. If you hit Tab, select a stroke or multiple strokes, hit M, like M as in mom, not N as in no, new layer, and then you can change that, you can name that shading for instance, and turn that off and on. And then we can make a new layer for the tongue as well. So we can select those objects, new layer, and call this one tongue. And you'll notice that that just covered up the shading. That's because the layer is above shading. So to move it back down, we can select tongue and click the down arrow right here. And you can do that for any of these things. You can put it behind the face, above the face. You can do whatever you want here. So that is the start of our very nifty tongue out smiley face emote using Blender Grease Pencil. The last step is just going to be to render it out, and that is super easy. I'd recommend going to the printer tab, setting this to 112 or even bigger, because if we do this at 28, you get some weird anti-aliasing issues. Look at how jagged that looks with Grease Pencil specifically. If you use regular objects in Blender, you don't have this issue. I honestly think it's a bug, but I would personally recommend rendering this out at 112, saving that image, save as, and we'll call this emote, then going to your Twitch affiliate options where you can upload emotes, and just upload the bigger size and let Twitch handle the downscaling so it looks nice when it gets downscaled. But that being said, that is how you create an emote in Blender 2.83 using Grease Pencil. Hopefully you found this useful. If you all want more in-depth coverage of some of the other tools with this, or maybe how to blend it or use it in addition to 3D objects, let me know in the comments down below. But that's pretty much it. Hopefully at this point you have a pretty good understanding of how to use Grease Pencil in Blender 2.83. If you have any questions or just want to come hang out with the best community on Twitch, I'm live every Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday at twitch.tv/oraclefishlive. And if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button below the video for new content every single week. Until next time, my name is Chris Folea, I'm your stream scholar, and class is out.